3 weeks after Marcus's demonstration, the galaxy was in chaos. Reports flooded in from across known space of impossible military defeats. The mighty hegemony warfleet had lost 3 major engagements to enemies using primitive tactics. Altarian defense forces found their impenetrable shields useless against attackers who simply walked around them. Even the Mechanist Collective's advanced battle networks were falling to opponents, wielding nothing more sophisticated than rocks and rope. Marcus sat in his small quarters aboard his cargo ship, reading the reports with interest. Through his viewport, he could see Zirion Station growing larger as his ship approached for what would likely be his final visit to the trading post. The station looked different now. Military vessels from a dozen different species crowded the docking bays. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council were being held daily. Everyone wanted answers about the sudden shift in warfare tactics spreading across the galaxy. When Marcus entered the trading post, he found it transformed. Gone were the displays of energy weapons and advanced technology. Instead, merchants were hawking primitive tools, simple materials, and basic instruction manuals. Everyone was trying to capitalize on the new demand for low-tech solutions. Commander Zakth was waiting for him at what had been Marcus's usual spot. The massive reptilian warrior looked exhausted, his scales dull with stress. "You did this," Zakth said without preamble. "The chaos, the defeats, the panic, all of it traces back to your demonstrations here." Marcus nodded calmly. "People learned. That's what people do. My fleet lost 40% of its strength to rebels using slingshots and mirrors," Zakth growled. 40%. Against an enemy we should have crushed effortlessly. "What happened?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Zakth activated a holographic display showing the recent battle. "They used your tactics, coordinated light reflection to blind our targeting systems. Projectile weapons that our shields couldn't stop, kinetic traps that turned our armor's weight against us." The hologram showed hegemony fighters spinning helplessly after flying into nearly invisible triplines. Ground troops stumbling and falling when simple rope snares caught their heavy boots. Command ships firing blindly, while enemy mirrors turned their own searchlights into weapons of confusion. "And it worked because you changed your tactics to counter their tactics," Marcus observed. "But they adapted too. How do we stop this?" Zakth demanded. "How do we restore order?" "Oh." Marcus picked up the wooden practice sword he'd left behind weeks ago. Someone had moved it to a display case, as if it were some kind of artifact. "You don't stop it," he said. "You adapt to it." Admiral Thessarian approached from across the trading post, her silver skin patterns cycling rapidly through stress indicators. "Human Marcus," she said formally. "The Altarian High Command requests immediate consultation. Our defensive doctrine has become obsolete overnight." "How so?" Marcus asked. "Enemies are no longer attempting to penetrate our shields," she explained. "They simply ignore them. Yesterday, attackers used wooden planks to build bridges over our energy barriers." "Wooden planks? Our most sophisticated defenses defeated by construction materials," Marcus nodded. "And now you're worried that your entire military philosophy is useless, isn't it?" Thessarian asked plaintively. "No," Marcus replied. "It's just incomplete." High Technician Vex High approached from another direction, its mechanical body showing signs of hasty repairs. Query: "Human Marcus, the collective requires data regarding sustainable military evolution. Current paradigm shift threatens systemic collapse of established order." "Translation?" Marcus requested. "Everyone's fighting differently now, and we don't know how to keep up," Zakth provided grimly. Marcus looked around the trading post. Merchants were arguing frantically with customers about the merits of various primitive weapons. Scientists were running experiments on simple tools. Military officials were desperately trying to understand how their billion-credit warships could be neutralized by opponents with pocket mirrors. "The problem," Marcus said finally, "is that you're all still thinking in terms of superior and inferior technology." He pulled the practice sword from its display case and examined it carefully. "You see primitive tools defeating advanced weapons, and you conclude that primitive is better. So you abandon your technology and try to fight with rocks and sticks." Marcus swung the wooden sword experimentally, testing its balance. But that's not the lesson. The lesson is that effectiveness isn't about advancement. It's about application. 1. He walked over to where a Kythera merchant was demonstrating a plasma rifle to a potential customer. "May I?" Marcus asked politely. The insectoid merchant chittered agreement, curious to see what the human would do. Marcus took the plasma rifle and examined it briefly. Then he set it down and picked up a simple wooden staff from a nearby primitive weapons display. "Both of these are tools," he explained to the growing crowd. "The rifle focuses energy to create heat and destruction at a distance. The staff focuses kinetic energy to create impact and leverage at close range." He hefted both weapons, comparing their weight and balance. Neither is superior to the other. They're designed for different purposes, different ranges, different situations. Marcus handed the plasma rifle back to the Kythera. "The mistake everyone's making is thinking in absolutes. Advanced versus primitive. Technology versus nature. Complex versus simple." He kept the wooden staff and began moving through basic combat forms, demonstrating the weapon's reach and versatility. The real lesson is that every tool has strengths and weaknesses. Every strategy has counters. Every advantage has corresponding vulnerabilities. The crowd was listening intently now. This was what they'd come to hear. Not just demonstrations of impossible weapons, but understanding of the principles behind them. "Your plasma rifle," Marcus continued, addressing the Kythera, "is excellent for long-range combat in open terrain. But what happens in close quarters? What happens if someone gets inside your firing range?" The merchant hadn't considered this. None of them had, really. They'd been so focused on making their weapons more powerful that they'd forgotten to think about their limitations. Marcus demonstrated with the wooden staff, showing how its length could control distance, how its simplicity made it reliable in any environment, how its lack of complex systems meant it couldn't malfunction at critical moments. "And your staff," he said, addressing a human merchant who'd been selling primitive weapons, "is excellent for close combat and doesn't rely on power sources. But what happens against an opponent in full armor? What happens at long range?" The pattern was becoming clear. Every weapon, every strategy, every technology had its place. The key wasn't finding the perfect tool. It was understanding when to use which tool. "So what do we do?" Admiral Thessarian asked. "How do we fight wars when any advantage can be countered?" Marcus smiled. "You learn. You adapt. You think." He walked back to the center of the trading post and pulled out his original wooden spear, the one that had started everything. "You all want to know how this cuts through alloy," he said, holding it up for everyone to see. The crowd pressed closer. This was the secret they'd all been waiting for. "The answer is that it doesn't," Marcus said simply. Confused murmurs ran through the crowd. They'd all seen the demonstration. They'd all watched the wooden tip slice through military-grade metal. "It doesn't cut through the alloy," Marcus repeated. "It cuts through something else entirely." He walked over to the piece of alloy that still sat on display, still showing the perfect cut from weeks ago. "This metal is incredibly strong. But it's also manufactured using specific processes, specific techniques, specific assumptions about stress and force distribution." Marcus traced the cut edge with one finger. "The spear doesn't overcome the metal's strength. It exploits a weakness in how the metal was made. A resonance frequency in the crystalline structure. A specific point where applied pressure causes cascade failure." The truth was starting to dawn on some faces in the crowd. "You studied the manufacturing process," High Technician Vex High stated. "You identified vulnerability parameters in the molecular matrix." "Oh, here's 7. Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "I didn't develop a super weapon. I did research. I learned how the alloy worked, found its weakness, and applied the right force at the right place in the right way." He held up the wooden spear again. "This isn't magic. It's not superior technology. It's just knowledge applied intelligently." Commander Zacht was beginning to understand. "You're saying we need to study our enemies, instead of just trying to outgun them." "I'm saying you need to understand what you're fighting before you decide how to fight it," Marcus corrected. Admiral Thessarian's patterns shifted to indicate rapid processing, intelligence gathering, tactical analysis, understanding the opponent's capabilities and limitations before engaging. Basic military principles, Marcus agreed. You all got so focused on building better weapons that you forgot to think about how to use them effectively. He packed his spear away for the final time. The galaxy's changing now. Everyone's learning to think tactically instead of just shooting bigger guns. Some will adapt better than others. Some will find new ways to combine advanced technology with simple tactics. Some will discover that their old methods work fine when applied intelligently. Marcus shouldered his pack and prepared to leave. But the chaos won't last forever. Eventually, everyone will figure out the new paradigms. Strategies will evolve to counter strategies. Technology will adapt to address new vulnerabilities. And then you'll all be back where you started, looking for the next advantage. What do we do then? Zach asked. Marcus paused at the entrance to the trading post. Learn, adapt, think, same as always. He looked back at the crowd one final time. The tools change, but the principles don't. Understanding your enemy, knowing your environment, applying appropriate force at the right time and place. These things never become obsolete. As he walked away, Marcus could hear the conversations starting behind him. Plans being made, strategies discussed, new approaches considered. The galaxy would be different now. Wars would be fought with intelligence as much as firepower. Victory would go to those who thought clearly, not just those who shot hardest. It was a good change. Marcus's cargo ship lifted off from Zirian Station 3 hours later. In his personal log, he made a simple entry: lesson delivered, students learning. Moving on to next assignment. The entry was coded and transmitted to a distant location where other humans received it with satisfaction. The galaxy was starting to discover what humanity had known for millennia, that the smartest fighter usually wins, regardless of the weapons they carry. Soon, it would be time for the next phase of humanity's quiet integration into galactic civilization. But that was a story for another day. For now, Marcus set course for a distant star system where reports indicated a species that had never lost a battle was becoming overconfident. They probably needed to learn something about humility. Marcus Chen smiled to himself as his ship jumped to hyperspace. Teaching was such rewarding work.